Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Dr. Thomas Hemingway here. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out. All right. Today we have a wonderful guest who is a fellow physician and really into the natural and functional medicine aspect of how we can be well, not only today, but for the rest of our lives. How come, it has to end, right? Why can't we healthy till the end? So we have Dr. Frank Lipman here. He's a New York Times best-selling author many times over. A recent book that he wrote, The New Rules of Aging Well, is one of my favorites. He's got amazing books out there. So I'm so honored to have Dr. Lipman on the show. Dr. Lipman, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, what a pleasure. I've just been such a fan of your work. And I love how you really make what I think is obvious to many people intuitively into something that can be useful, practical, and incorporated into our lives. You call it good medicine. Tell us a little bit about that and your background and kind of how you came out to be who you are today.
Right. So I think my background's interesting and has influenced how I think today. I grew up in South Africa during apartheid in the 50s and 60s. And during apartheid means separate. Everything was separate. So whites and blacks had to live in separate areas, go to separate toilets, go to separate schools. And also the hospitals were either had white patients or black patients. And I grew up in a very interesting home, and I was always intrigued and attracted to black culture. And I chose to actually work in the black hospitals. And it was there that I had my first exposure to non-traditional medicine. I grew up in a medical family, but when you're working, I was working at the biggest hospital in Africa, Baragwanath Hospital, and when we couldn't help the patient's family used to call in the Sangoma, the traditional healer, to help the patients. And I noticed that sometimes they would help the patients. And I thought it was all quackery and nonsense. I was going through medical school and you think you have the answer to everything. But obviously it got stored somewhere in the back of my mind. And I found it interesting. And then when I had finished my medical school and did my internship in Soweto at Baragwanath Hospital, I went to work in the bush for 18 months. And then again, I got exposed to traditional healers. And there I sort of worked a little bit more closely with them or saw what was going on. And the same thing, same attitude. I thought, well, this is interesting, and it's all placebo, which I had a different understanding what placebo was to what I have now. But I saw it work sometimes. So that was my first introduction and sort of opened me up to a different way of thinking. And then also at the same time, I was doing a lot of drugs. And, in those days, I did some LSD, some acid, and that opened up my mind to a different way of thinking. So I think the combination of growing up in South Africa and knowing that the system is rotten, so you question the medical system as well, being exposed to traditional healers, and then these drugs. I'm pretty clean these days, but when in my youth, that's like 50 years ago, 45 years ago. It sort of opened me up to, different ways of thinking. So I think the combination of all of that sort of opened me up to where I am today. I think all of that played a part.
Yeah, no, so true. And I love how you've really taken two what could be classified as extremes or different ways of thinking: the Western approach, which is what I was originally trained in as well, and then more the integrative, holistic, functional approach. And the two can coexist. They can augment, they can help. There's so many wonderful ways in which they can work together. So I'm so pleased that you've been doing this for decades, which is what's so cool and why I'm so grateful to have you on the show. I know recently you've been super interested in how we can age well, right? Because all of us every day are getting a little bit older. And I think most of us don't realize it till we have a big injury, or whether it be 40s or 50s or 60s, and we're just really noticing we seem to be responding differently to different cues, and we don't have the same energy and stamina. You are expert in this, and you've recently written a book on this. What can we expect to really use on a daily basis in our lives as far as how can we age well? What are the sort of high level things that we can apply?
Right. So, I got into functional medicine very early on in the 80s. But I got into anti-aging, or how do you age well, when I started getting, I'm 68 now. So, when you get older, you start seeing things change. So I started exploring more and more what I could do to age well. I want to, there's this concept called Healthspan, which I'm sure you and all your listeners know about. I wanted to stay as healthy as I could for as long as I could, and then just, snuff it in the last few days of my life, be disabled, whatever, and just snuff it. So, now that I have a grandchild, all these things were happening to me at the same time. So I started exploring how I can age well, and then, apply it to myself and my patients. I've always experimented on myself. So it's been a journey of mine probably for the last 10 years. And it's really an extension of functional medicine, because aging is really just a decrease in function, which is sort of normal, but it doesn't have to be as rapid as most people age. You can slow down the aging. We're all going to get old, and aging is normal, but how well and how quickly you age is determined by how, what you do, your lifestyle changes, how you eat, how you think, how you deal with stress, how you sleep, what supplements you take. I think all these factors that we learn in functional medicine actually affect how we age. And so aging to me was just another extension of functional medicine.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And for the folks that aren't super familiar with functional medicine, it's really a dig deep approach to the root cause of things. It's not just a quick band-aid prescription like most of the Western physicians do. You have a symptom, whether it be high blood pressure, or you have high cholesterol, a headache, and you target it with some sort of medication, if you will, and it doesn't ever necessarily get to the root. And so functional medicine is getting to the root cause and then making the changes that will support your body, because your body's smart. It has an innate intelligence, and it knows how to heal. It knows how to, lower blood pressure. It knows how to do so many things, repair. And if we let it do that by giving it what it needs, it sort of figures it out. So it's an amazing process. And I think one of the things that I've heard you talk about before was somewhere maybe a decade or two ago, you noticed that in you, maybe some of the things that you used to eat, maybe growing up in South Africa, I know you ate a ton of fruit, for example, maybe didn't agree with you as much later on in life. And so you had to really key into some certain foods, and that kind of had a big impact on your immediate results, whether you were able to lose a little weight, have a little bit more energy. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened to me, I think happens to a lot of people. I was just lucky enough to, do my bloods and realize I became pre-diabetic. I can't even remember how long ago. It's 15 to I don't know how many years ago. I was eating a diet that thought was healthy and was promoting basically pescatarian. I wasn't eating any meat. I was eating tons of fruit, lots of whole grains, a little bit of fish, which it was generically healthy. And a lot of people still think it's healthy. But for me, and probably for a lot of people, especially as we age, was not that healthy, because I found that I was pre-diabetic. So eating this relatively healthy diet, and I wasn't really drinking much. I always loved sugar, but it's not that I was eating that much sugar. And, it was a bit of a shock when, and as I was getting older, I was putting on a little bit of weight around my stomach and my face. And I thought, well, that was just aging. I never thought that much about it. I still felt good. Maybe my energy was dropping a little bit, and I thought maybe I was just getting older. And then I did my bloods, and I was pre-diabetic, and I changed to a paleo diet. I started eating meat again. I started mainly eating protein and vegetables, and lo and behold, blood sugar dropped, weight dropped, energy increased. So, that's sort of the way I've been eating since then, and it's been fantastic. Now, this is not necessarily the right thing for everyone, but I do see this happening more and more as we get older, our capacity to metabolize carbs decreases. So I see more and more people as they get into their 40s and 50s starting to put a bit of weight on, their blood sugar creeps up, and things start to happen in a negative way in the body. So I think sugar and carbs are more of an issue as we age.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I know when I hit 40 nearly a decade ago, I started noticing some of those things. And I was kind of like you. I was in Hawaii eating tons of fruit, tons of pineapple, tons of
Right.
mango. I mean, there
Those
are
grapefruits,
so
I
many
love those tropical
amazing,
fruits. Yeah, they're fantastic. Yeah,
and they're so readily available. I mean,
yeah,
my neighbor always had this giant mango tree, and I would
yeah.
eat like 4 or 5 of those a day. And that's, a pretty sweet fruit. And I still love mango. I just don't eat
Me
four or
too.
five a day.
I agree. Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah,
Yeah, and so I think it's interesting because what you've noticed is this phenomenon of having an issue, a little bit of a challenge with digesting the carbs as we age that we didn't necessarily notice or recognize earlier on. And then this thing called insulin resistance, that's kind of this buzzword that everybody's hearing about now, which is sort of a pre-diabetic phase that
yeah,
a lot of us in sort of the Western world don't test for it, right? I know when I got my markers done maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I had to twist my provider's arm literally and say, I want a fasting insulin in addition
yeah.
to my fasting blood sugar. And he was like, oh, your fasting glucose has always been fine. Why do you want to do that? It's a waste of money. Maybe you have to pay for it out of pocket. And I said, no, I don't care. I will pay for it. I want it. And at that time, I was still working tons of night shifts. My diet was good, but there were things that I wasn't doing optimally. I wasn't sleeping well. I still liked a bowl of ice cream every evening, and I rarely have ice cream anymore, though I still like it.
Right.
But that test got me alerted to, hey, maybe I should switch it up a little bit. Maybe I shouldn't have quite so much fruit. Maybe I shouldn't drink fruit juice instead of, maybe just water now and just have the fruit with all the fiber and everything else and not do the juicing so much. And so it did tweak a little things with me. And I've noticed it's helped me tremendously as it did you. I think one of the other things you've noticed, and you talk about a lot in the book, is the aspect of not only just eating the high quality foods, but the timing of our foods. And maybe you can speak to that. You can speak about fasting, intermittent fasting, whatever you found to be helpful in that respect of the timing.
Do you ever get tired of planning, prepping, and cooking your own healthy meals? Well, I know I do. And so you've got to check out Trifecta Nutrition. They ship pre-made, high quality, with great ingredient meals right to your door. From paleo to keto to vegan and so much more. They have delicious meals for every diet. You got to go over there to trifectanutrition.com and check out the code Dr. Thomas, DrThomas, for 40% off at checkout. So trifectanutrition.com and use the code DrThomas at checkout and get yourself 40% off. I hope you'll enjoy it as I do. Aloha.
Yeah. So, as I said, the paleo type of diet helped me tremendously. And then once again, how many years ago, I don't know, I got into fasting. It became, I think Jason Fung actually was the one who turned me on to the fasting, and I started experimenting. And, once again, I noticed, differences. And now there's more and more research showing that if you compress the time that you eat all your calories, it has beneficial effects on your blood sugar, on your lipid numbers, on your cognitive function, on so many aspects of your health. And now it's almost standard that more and more people are fasting or compressing their eating time into, let's say, an 8 or 10 hour period. So that's just become part of my lifestyle, and I recommend it a lot. Now, and I don't, I think as we get older, it's probably the right thing to do for most of us. When you're younger, it may not be, I sort of have this cutoff point of 40 years old, whether it's correct or not. But around once you up to 40 and you're still conceiving and making babies and proliferating, whatever, intermittent fasting may not be the right thing for you. But once you get into your 40s and older, intermittent fasting or time restricted eating your calories in a specific time frame of 8 to 10 hours actually has incredible benefits on how well we age. So that is one of the major hacks or whatever that I recommend as we get older. So it's not only what you eat, but it's when you eat.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I love it now that the data is catching up, because there's so much of that where they've studied, initially it was the work done in mice, for example. Now, of course, we have human data that suggests the same thing. You can eat the exact same diet, same number of calories, same foods even, but those that have the compressed window will not only have better
Yeah.
markers, but they'll tend to be more lean, have less inflammation in their body. I mean, it's a true win-win, and it doesn't cost anything, right?
Oh no, and it's actually easy. And once you get used to it, it's actually just becomes an easy way of life. And what's interesting is almost every week I'm seeing more and more research come out on the effects of whether it's fasting mimicking diet or some type of fasting. So as you said, it's an easy, cheap hack.
Yeah. And besides the cheap and easy, I love what you mentioned, the simplicity. Like, for example, if you're just skipping a meal, whether it be breakfast or dinner, that's one less meal you have to plan for, buy for, prepare for, clean up after. I got 6 kids, and cleaning up after 6 kids is a big deal. Although now they're old enough to kind of clean up after themselves, but it just simplifies your life. It frees you up to do other things that you enjoy. And it's,
and you eat less, which is probably one of the most researched factors in aging well, is sort of just decreasing the amount of calories you eat. So you just tend to eat less when you're eating 2 meals a day than 3 meals a day. So, it's just overall there are hardly any negatives.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And unfortunately, in I would say, Western society, we haven't really been taught this business about eating until you're only about 60 or 70% full versus eating until you're full. I knew when I was a kid, I grew up in a little bit of a scarcity mindset where whatever was on my plate, I was going to finish that 100% of the time, because I wasn't sure, if we would have another meal a little bit later on, or if I'd have to fight my brothers for the leftovers or whatever. I was always finishing my plate. And now later in life, I have no problems leaving things on my plate. If I'm at a restaurant or whatever, and I don't want to finish it, I just don't finish it.
Yeah, no, that's good. But I will say, now I wear a CGM, a continuous blood glucose monitor. So here's a good example of how you sort of got to be careful. So I fast, like I don't usually have breakfast. But this morning we were out with my grandson. So we took him to the local bakery near. He loves croissants. So so my wife and I took him and we went for a croissant. So I had a croissant, breaking my fast, and my blood sugar I measure my blood sugar. So my blood sugar shot up and then crashed afterwards, and I felt like crap. So you got to be smart about what you eat as well. It's not only when you eat. So I wouldn't think that fasting, you can just go eat, especially breaking the fast in the morning. The worst thing is a typical breakfast. So don't have a croissant and coffee for breakfast if you've been fasting.
Yeah. Don't break the fast with a bunch of carbs, especially anything that's baked, processed, or what have you. I couldn't agree more. And I think that you've discovered, having the CGM, monitoring that, sometimes it'll surprise you. I know when I did it, I was surprised that certain foods that I always considered healthy didn't agree with me that much. For example, I've never been a fan of like those quick oats or whatever, but I did steel cut oats and I thought those are pretty good. It's a healthy grain. I'd put some raspberries or blueberries on it, and that's it. No sugar. I didn't even put honey on it. But I ate that and monitored it, and I was like, holy crap, my sugar is 175 how is that even possible? So I think sometimes you are a little bit alarmed, because in everybody, we're different. Everybody's not the same. We can tolerate a little bit of this or that. And so when you really check under the hood and you get the data like you're doing, I think that's super helpful and interesting, because you can kind of fine tune, what works for you. And have the numbers to back it, not just be guessing,
Exactly. And I think this is, we living in interesting times now, because you could actually measure, like, minute to minute, second to second, what's going on in your body. Now with the CGMs, you can measure that. With the sleep apps, you can measure how you sleep. You can measure your HRV. There's so many things that we can measure and really take our health to another level. And I think that's the new medicine, where you're sort of combining what we've been doing for all these years, where we measure the biomarkers, we help people with their diets, and that we can talk about genetics as well. I usually add a nutritional genetic test, but now we can add these wearables and get sort of minute to minute data on what's going on in your body. So to me, the future of medicine is a combination of all of that.
Yeah, I really believe that to be the case. And the cool thing about not only getting your own individual data is when you add that to giant databases, you can use artificial intelligence programs to really look at the overwhelming majority of people, how they respond to different things. Like if you can't afford to get your own CGI and you just want to plug into the data bank and see how most people react to certain foods, you can get that information as well and not even have to invest personally in such a device. So I think there's so much potential, so much information that can be so helpful. You mentioned sleep, and I'd love to talk a little bit about your take on sleep. I would imagine when you were in your training years and early years, I would imagine you slept a little less because of the rigors of all of that. I certainly did myself, but part of the issue too, I think you and I both were trained in an era where we didn't value our sleep to the same degree. We didn't know about the work of Dr. Iliffe and Nattergaard that came up with the glymphatic system. We didn't know about autophagy. We didn't know any of that stuff. We knew that if you didn't sleep, you felt like crap and you were maybe less likely to remember things, your fine, motor skills and all that diminished, but we didn't really know all of the magic that happens when we sleep. Maybe you can speak to sleep a little bit and how that's affected your life, your patient's life, and what sort of tips you have for our folks.
Yeah, sure. And, I'll take what you said even a step further. We used to use it as a badge of honor that you don't need as much sleep. And I actually wrote a book on sleep because one of my patients who I had helped was one of the founders of Casper, the mattress company. And he got into health afterwards, and he wanted to sort of take Casper in a more health direction and bring sleep on. So we started sort of researching sleep more and going back and forth via email. And we said, oh God, we've got to write a book on this, because he had asked me to be an advisor for Casper. So I started exploring sleep, and we started sending each other all these articles. And this was a number of years ago. And I realized that there's so much research on sleep, but we just don't take it seriously enough. And now it's changing a little bit. And sleep is a really interesting function of the body. I mean, it's your primary, I see the body in terms of rhythms, maybe coming from South Africa, maybe training in Chinese medicine, but rhythm is important. Your sleep and your wake time are your primary rhythms, being awake during the day, being asleep at night, and how important those rhythms are. So the more I got into sleep, the more I realized how important it is and how active your body is during sleep. You mentioned the glymphatic system, which I would assume your readers know about. The glymphatic system is a system that's sort of like a detox system in the brain. It's a sort of this cleanup crew that sort of comes and cleans out all those neurochemicals that get, built up during the day. And it only works at night when you're sleeping. So if you don't sleep, this toxicity, for lack of another term, builds up in your brain. And, the metaphor I always use is if you have a party one night and there's a mess in the morning, you don't come up and clean up the mess. And the next night you have another party, and the next night another party, and you're not cleaning up the mess. Over time, the mess just increases and increases. And that's what's happening in our brain if we're not sleeping. So just that alone, although there's so much more that's happening when you're sleeping, your body's repairing, but just that alone should scare the shit out of people to take sleep seriously.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And of course, you've written the book, Better Sleep, Better You. And I know that one of the things I've heard you talk about as you age, everybody says that the misperception that you don't need as much sleep.
Exactly.
And I've never felt that to really be the case. And I'd love to hear your take on that as we age. How is sleep important, maybe even more important?
I think that's a great point, because what I had found, and when from years back, all the older people, and I had sort of believed that myth as well, is as you get older, you wake up and you just don't need as much sleep. So I just thought it was normal that you just don't need as much sleep as you get older. The thing is, you do need, in fact, you definitely need the same, maybe even a little bit more. But what happens is it becomes harder as you get older to sleep as well and as much as when you're younger. So as you get older, you actually have to pay more attention to your sleep, because it's probably one of the best anti-aging tips you can give anyone, is just to take your sleep seriously and just get a good amount of sleep especially deep sleep, but REM sleep too. But I think taking sleep seriously as we get older and not thinking you don't need as much, because yes, you tend to wake up earlier. I wake up so early anyway, but I just go to bed early. I don't go to bed at 11 o'clock anymore. I go to bed at 9, 9:30, 10 the latest, because I'm going to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's just the way it is. So I don't fight it. And I think that's important to realize, that although you will wake up earlier, probably as you get older, it's probably a good idea to go to sleep earlier, because you need as much, if not a little bit more sleep as you get older.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I've started to really, in the last decade of my life, value that sleep so much more than ever before. I've ditched the mantra of sleep when you're dead that I had through medical school training, early practice, all those years. And I found that I'm a much nicer human. I feel better. I can get more done in less time. Because I think nowadays we always have that notion, well, we only have so many hours in the day. Why do we want to spend a third of it sleeping? That just seems like such a waste. And thank goodness we have so much more data now than we ever did in the schooling process and so on. And so that's available. I find people sometimes, despite trying to optimize all of the things, right? A cool, dark room, free of distractions, no blue lights. They don't eat late at night. They schedule it. They make it a routine. Sometimes people still struggle with their sleep. Do you find that there are any particular supplements that may help, or other sort of additional things that can really help when somebody's kind of tried all of the usual techniques as far as rhythm and as far as routine and all of those things?
So sleep is tricky, and it's a hard one. And a lot of people come in and see me and they've done all of that, to be quite honest, because that's all out there. So I'm always usually looking for, why is this happening? And I'd say the commonest cause is stress. So, that's common. You talked about rhythm. I find actually people just telling people to go for a walk first thing in the morning or get some bright light actually helps their body get back into rhythm. So if it's a rhythm problem, going for a walk in the morning, sometimes using melatonin at night can help. But as you said, a lot of people are doing all the right things and they still can't sleep. And the two big things I find are, or three big, stress is extremely common. For women around menopause, it's often a hormonal issue, and a bit of progesterone does wonders. And sometimes it's the gut. I've seen more and more an altered microbiome affecting sleep. And once we optimize the microbiome, or balance it, I hate the term balancing the microbiome, but once we get the microbiome and the gut functioning better, sleep gets better too. And I think that's probably because certain bacteria, especially some of the pathogenic or the bad bacteria, release metabolites that are affecting our sleep negatively. So I think correcting the gut, dealing with the stress, very important. And then I'm a huge fan of CBD, or actually CBN, for sleep. I find CBN, which is a strain of CBD, or sometimes some THC as well, but you've got to find what works for you. But I do find CBN, sometimes THC and CBN, to be extremely helpful as a supplement. I'm always using magnesium, and I use glycine, and I use theanine and GABA, and I use a whole host of ashwagandha sometimes. I'm using all these nutrients, but I do find a good CBN and sometimes the THC can be extremely helpful, because I think people are stressed out and without even realizing it. I think the CBN probably just calms down the nervous system.
Do you like hackers? I certainly don't. I hate them. I just can't stand even the thought of being hacked at the airport or any other place where you use public Wi-Fi. And so I have joined ExpressVPN, and you should too. And if you use my code at expressvpn.com/Dr. Thomas, that's DrThomas, you will get 3 months for free. So why stress about the hackers? Why stress about using airport Wi-Fi? I don't any longer. In fact, I use airport Wi-Fi all the time because I'm protected at ExpressVPN. So check it out, expressvpn.com/Dr. Thomas for 3 months free.
Yeah, I love that you incorporated all of those things and reminding us that our gut, the microbiota that exists there, both the bacteria, viruses, fungi, whatever, parasites that are all there, all of the protozoa, they all have a rhythm just like us. They actually have a circadian rhythm. And if we respect theirs and ours, we can work together better. And the data does definitely show that. And it's an exciting time now because we can measure it, whereas we didn't used to. And now we have so many more data points to be able to look at these things. You mentioned a couple of supplements. I would love to kind of hear if you can do a little bit of a quick list on what you feel like are your biggest impact supplements that most people can benefit from. You mentioned one of my favorites already, which is magnesium. It's awesome for sleep, but so many other things. So maybe give me a quick list.
Well, I think most people are deficient in magnesium. I think most of my patients, I'll give them magnesium. What I do now, I mean, listen, I take a shitload of supplements myself. I take, I take from curcumin, alpha lipoic acid, CoQ10. I take a lot of supplements. NMN, you name it, I take it. But I do think now with genetics, you can, how I use the whole genetic test that I use, the 3x4 genetics, you can, to a large extent, fine tune or you really use targeted supplementation. So I'm all for supplements. I think targeted supplementation is the way to go. So if someone has heart disease or someone has blood sugar issues, I'll use berberine or coenzyme Q10 if someone has heart disease, or alpha lipoic acid for, whatever the point is. I try to target the supplementation, and I do find genetics helpful in that way, because not many people are going to take 50 supplements like me every day. But I'm a huge fan of. I think supplements, if they're used appropriately, if you're taking good quality supplements, make a big difference. I do. I'm 68 and I feel like I'm probably 48. And I think supplements play a part. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't eat well and you shouldn't exercise and you shouldn't meditate or whatever you're doing. And, I still, go for my sauna and I'll do all the things that I recommend, but I do add the supplements as well.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an important tool in the toolbox. And I think that especially now that we, like you mentioned, the 3x4 testing, where we can kind of really target what we're going to take, because, there's no one size fits all. Everybody should take all of these 20 things. You can actually save a little money by investing first in the testing, so what you'll be most, benefited by. And then at the same time, you can use all those other things in conjunction, because I think one maybe it's a Western thing, I don't know, but often we just love to reach for whatever those things are, be it supplements, medications, and then we're like, we'll use it as an excuse to not do the things that are super important, like eat real food, for example. So it's never to replace, it's only to augment an already, good diet and good choices with respect to our stress, our sleep, our exercise, all of those types of things. Maybe we can just talk briefly about exercise as we age. Is it more important? Is it less important? Is it different? Do we do different types of exercise? What have you found with respect to exercise and aging?
Great question, because that has always been my weak link, although now I'm taking it much more seriously. I think as we get older, we start losing muscle mass and strength training becomes more important. I used to ride my bike and do yoga, and I wasn't into the gym or weights or anything like that, to be quite honest. And, as I've gotten older, and you start seeing, I started to lose some muscle mass, and realizing that muscle is a metabolic organ as well, which is very important for sugar metabolism. I started doing weights and strength training. So I do think as we get older, becomes probably more important to incorporate strength training. Now, doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing some aerobic, and when I do aerobic, I tend to do HIIT or high intensity interval training. But I think, and I don't stretch as much as I don't do yoga anymore after I broke my wrist, but I think that is important. But I think as we get older, if you look at what's probably more important, would be strength training and balance, developing a strong core, because, what I've noticed over the years, when people get older, and they start having a weak core, and they can't get up from sitting, or they can't do basic things that we want to do as we get older, you start, I started realizing anyway from watching my older patients and seeing where they were struggling, how important strong core, just being able to get up from sitting. Basic things, how some people struggle. So I do think, more balance, more strength training as you get older, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do your aerobic exercise and some stretching or keeping flexible at the same time.
Yeah. It's interesting, as I've just in the last decade, I've come to love walking as a sort of a go-to kind of fill in the gaps kind of thing. I love to take a 5 or 10 minute walk after I eat anything. Just helps me digest. I just feel better.
I've got to tell you something really interesting about now that I've been, now that I measure my sugar. One of the best things to bring your sugar down, which is it's unbelievable. I'd read about it. If you go for a walk after a meal, it can just be a 10-minute walk. Your blood sugar will come down 20 points. That's what it's pretty amazing. You're not doing anything strenuous. So there's something happening with, I also walk quite a bit, but a simple thing like that is pretty wild. And it's actually great that you can actually, measure these things now. So I'm actually very fascinated by this walk, just a 10-minute walk after a meal, which most cultures have sort of recommended. You always said, well, it helps you digest, but I think it's going way beyond that even. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And most of the cultures that we aim to mimic, like out in the Mediterranean and these other places, the so-called blue zones and things, they walk everywhere, but they always walk after they eat. I took a trip to Italy about 20 years ago, and then another one about 10 years ago. And in the evenings after meals, the dinner meal, everybody was out walking. In any age, young people, older people, didn't matter. They were always out walking. And my wife would kind of pinch me and go, "Isn't that cute? Don't you want to be that couple that's always walking?" And they've had this down for millennia.
Yeah,
maybe.
and now that we can measure it, there's no question my blood sugar comes down. And I knew it helps digestion. I knew it was a nice thing to do, but I didn't realize, so this is what I find fascinating. A lot of the older cultures were doing things so many things that are part of this wisdom that was part of ancient cultures that we didn't really understand. There's so much wisdom in what they, fasting was, most cultures, had fasting. Most cultures did a lot of the things that we now call biohacking.
Yeah, that's so true. I wanted to ask you, when you wrote the book, Aging Well, The New Rules of Aging Well, did you come across anything that kind of surprised you, or was there anything that maybe most people wouldn't necessarily think of when thinking about how to age well? Maybe something about relationships, something about connection. I don't know. Was there anything that was a little surprising to you that we should probably talk more about as a society?
Surprise. Hard to say surprising, but what I did realize is what I've always basically said, that the simple things we do on a daily, the simple things or the ordinary things we do on a daily basis have an extraordinary effect on our health. And when you start looking at all the research, there's so much research now on loneliness and connections and emotional health. So what I did find interesting was more and more research on a lot of the sort of psycho-emotional aspects of health that we don't really take much notice of in Western medicine. Even things like taking a walk in nature, So I did find a lot of research on a lot of these little things, once again, that most cultures have sort of done or were part of most cultures, but more and more research coming out on it. What else was, I found, saunas. I didn't realize that. I knew, I have a sauna. I love my sauna, but I didn't realize, what a powerful effect it can have on aging.
About the cold plunge. Do you do a cold plunge as well, or some version of it?
Well, here we in New York, they've just closed up the pool. I jump into my cold pool, but I actually need to get a cold plunge. I do a cold shower after my warm shower. I just do my, I hate it, but I do it. But I need to get a cold plunge. But what I've always done I can only do it for 4 months. I jump into a cold pool after a sauna, but it's not the same. I've been exploring getting one. Actually.
Yeah. No, I'm actually, I don't have one yet either, but I've been doing the research on it. As far as I've used one, if I go to a club that has one, I
Yeah,
use it. Or I tell people that I did the cold plunge before anybody knew anything about it, because I grew up where the water was 50 degrees, 50, and I got in it every single day. I didn't know that it was having health benefits in
right,
those days. I was doing it because I didn't have any option. That's just how cold the water was.
exactly, right.
I knew that I was awake afterwards. My parents
Yeah,
thought I was crazy because I got up at 5 a.m. and I would go surfing in 50-degree water. And then I would go to school all day and then I had a job after school and things like that. And they're like, how can you even do that? I said, you jump in the water at 6 a.m. and it's 50 degrees, you'll be wide awake. I promise.
right,
There's no way you're going to be falling asleep. And we didn't know all of the benefits that we
right.
know now
Yeah,
about the hormetic stress and how great that is
exactly.
for you,
Yeah.
and all those sorts of things. I know we're getting close to the time. I wanted you to take a few minutes and just talk about any other sort of wisdom that you'd love to impart, be it on aging well, on sleep, or just basic functional medicine stuff, whatever you would like to talk about in closing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what I just said. I think people don't realize that those ordinary things we do on a daily basis are what you should realize is it's medicine, being kind to others, having gratitude, going for a walk on the beach, going for a walk in the forest. What these things that we don't realize actually are medicine, have, beneficial effects on our health. So I think that to me is probably the most important. Don't take those things for granted. Um, the basic things everyone knows. I think we had a very exciting time now with all this technology, and how you can measure your blood glucose, your sleep, your stress per se. I think this is an exciting time, and I'm just part of there's a brilliant young guy. You should have him on your podcast. A young guy who's started this startup where I'm chief medical officer, where he's basically taking what I do in my practice, all the blood biomarkers and the genetics, and they're overlaying that with all the wearables, and they've created an app where it's all that information is in one app. So it's pretty fascinating. I think that's the future of medicine. So, if you want to measure everything, some people makes them more neurotic. It's not right for everyone. But I think the important thing is, being kind, being loving, having compassion. All these, the wisdom from all these cultures is what I think aging well is really about. Yes, you got to eat well. I think fasting helps, low sugar diet, exercising, dealing with stress. All those things are obviously important, and the supplements too. But don't forget about these simple things that we don't realize have these huge beneficial effects on our health.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think as we age, it becomes maybe a little easier, right? Even
Yes,
this notion, besides connection, but I think sometimes we hold things within us that we just are too proud to let go of, whether it be we can't forgive a certain person or a certain thing that happened, or whatever that is, to just sort of the art of letting go and really having some forgiveness.
exactly.
Because what I found in my life, and I'm sure you've had similar, is that often, like if we're holding this angst or rancor or
Absolutely.
whatever it is in us, often the other person they've moved on, they're living
Yeah,
their great life. It's not affecting them at all. The person that it really affects is right here. It's us. And we are the only
exactly.
ones that can let that go. We're the only ones
Exactly.
that can do
Exactly.
that. And
Exactly.
just,
I knew I was lucky enough to know Bishop Desmond Tutu from in South Africa. And he always talked about forgiving. And actually, Nelson Mandela used to say the same thing. Forgiving actually helps you more than whoever you're forgiving, because you're letting go. You're not holding yourself in that prison anymore. And actually, we'll finish off with that great story of Nelson Mandela when he got out of prison, and he walked past, is walking out of prison, and he saw the guy who was his warder, and a little bit of anger sort of welled up inside of him, and he said to himself, he doesn't want to be imprisoned anymore. So he let that go, because he felt that if he held on to that anger, he would forever be imprisoned. So I think that's a great way to end it. So yes, I think letting go of all those, the anger, the bitterness, and forgiving is really good for your health.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been so enjoyable, so informational, uplifting, and I think we can use these practical steps in our lives. How can our listeners and viewers reach out to you? How can they take advantage of the information you're putting out to the world, maybe programs and your insight? Where can we find you?
Yeah, I have a website, Dr. Frank Lipman, drfranklipman.com. I tweet a lot. I'm on Twitter. I don't even know what's it, Dr. Frank. I don't know what yours said.
Yeah.
I have an Instagram account, which actually I have these young women who help me with it. I don't do my own Instagram, but yeah, I put out information. And if anyone's interested in this new app, it's called joinhearty.com, www.joinhearty, Join Hearty, as in a heart with a Y, Join Heart. I mean, I think that in time will be the future of medicine. But if you want information, my website, my Twitter feed is all good.
Yeah, super simple. Dr. Frank Lipman. It's just DR and then Frank Lipman. And I'll put all that in the show notes and all of that good stuff. Make it easy for everybody.
Great talking to you.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure. Really appreciate you. Aloha to you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Please make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss out on any future episode. And I'd love to hear your comments and feedback. If there's any topic you'd love to hear about, you're dying to know, burning questions, please comment below and let me know what future topics are of interest to you.